The Fed15 podcast is presented by Serving Those Who Serve, a financial planning practice serving federal government employees and retirees all over the country. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be taken as financial advice. All listeners should consult their personal advisors before taking any action. The opinions expressed by our hosts are their own and do not reflect the views, policies, or position of either Raymond James or Serving Those Who Serve. Securities are offered through Raymond James Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services are offered through Raymond James Financial Services Advisors, Inc. Serving Those Who Serve is not a registered broker-dealer and is independent of Raymond James Financial Services, Inc. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Fed15 podcast presented by Serving Those Who Serve. Each week, we'll be discussing the latest news and info that feds need to know in 15 minutes or less. So whether you're a seasoned federal employee or just starting out in your career, Fed15 has got you covered. So grab your coffee, kick back, and we'll tell you what you need to know but might have missed in the federal space this week. We are your hosts. I'm Katelyn Murray, and I am joined by the one and only Silver Fox, Mr. Dan Sipe.
Okay, funny story. I typically, though, characterize myself as Gray Wolf.
Not like that.
But funny story, my before we got married, Miss Mary worked in a very, very cool dinner theater, and it was all magic. So there would be a magic show to go along with it. And there was a magician there who went by the Silver Fox. And he had this really cool trick where you'd pick a card, you put it in the deck, he'd put rubber bands around it, and he'd have a thumbtack in his hand. And then he'd throw it up in the air, and the deck would fall back down, and your card would be stuck to the ceiling. With the thumbtack. But right before he would do that, he would say, "Now, folks, I need to practice this with you, because after I do this trick, and it's going to be a great trick, I need everybody here to say, 'Merciful sakes alive, the Silver Fox has done it again.'"
Wow.
So that's why, out of respect for him, I've always stayed away from Silver Fox, because I can't do that trick. So
Fair. Well, you're always learning things. So
thank you.
Maybe. I would love to see that trick at this year's STWS gala. I would love that. Start working on it now, buddy.
Those are really high ceilings there.
I know.
Really, really high ceilings.
Excellent. Well, yes. On today's episode, we have a couple topics. Funny that we're talking about silver foxes, right? And this might be why it's in my brain. We've got a great article on the blog this week about smart strategies for couples who are planning for retirement, who may have an age difference in kind of an age gap relationship, if you will. And then later on, towards the end of the episode, make sure you stay tuned, because Dan's going to talk with us a little bit about the COLA watch. And I'm not talking Pepsi here, folks. What the 2026 estimate could mean for FERS and CSRS retirees. So you know that we like to keep a very close watch on what's going on with that COLA, because it does impact our Fed. So Dan's going to be talking with us a bit about that. But before we get there, let's talk about planning for age gap couples. So a lot of folks don't realize that with an age gap relationship also comes a planning gap. Age differences between spouses can lead to health insurance coverage gaps, uneven income years, and potentially tax surprises. It can mess with the Roth conversion window as well, because if you've retired and your income has dropped, your taxable income that you're reporting, but your spouse is still working full time, and depending on what age they are and where they are in their career, they could be at the top of their earnings potential. That could really kind of jam you up when it comes to Roth conversion strategies. So it may mean that you need to widen your Roth conversion window and convert a little bit for a lot more years, rather than converting a lot in several years. So age gap relationships are more common these days, very common in second marriages and dual career households. The problem is, unless you're coordinating your retirement timelines, you can miss out on key opportunities or experience unexpected complications when it comes to retirement. So especially, really everybody should have a financial plan. Not everybody needs a financial planner, but everybody needs a financial plan. But with age gap relationships, it's really important to have tailored planning that helps you align your benefits, your timing, and your long-term goals. So similar to folks who have blended families, right? We always say if you've got a blended family, it's a red flag for estate planning. You want to make sure you have your estate planning in place. If you are in an age gap relationship, and we're defining that as more than maybe 4 years, certainly more than 5 years between the two partners, you're definitely going to want to make sure that you're working with someone and that you're getting that tailored planning to make sure that you're not missing out on opportunities or that you don't have those nasty surprises. So a couple examples. I know we talked about the Roth conversion one up top. Medicare and health insurance. Okay. Medicare starts at 65. If you reach 65 before your spouse or vice versa, the younger spouse could be without coverage if they're relying on the older spouse's plan. Now, if you're Fed, you potentially could have FEHB coverage, and that would be great. However, you're going to want to make sure that you're coordinating those benefits and that you understand that the cost will be different for FEHB pre-Medicare versus post-Medicare. Common solution to this, we talked about continuing FEHB coverage. We talked about the other one is if the younger spouse is still working, then they could take out healthcare insurance through their employer and have a group plan. Private healthcare insurance is available, but it is often quite expensive. So just something to think about there.
Sure.
When it comes to Social Security, that's another kind of piece of the puzzle here. Split claiming strategies could increase total household benefits. A split strategy with Social Security, just at a very high level, one spouse essentially claims early. Possibly that person's also claiming a spousal benefit. And the other person delays to age 70 so that they can get the maximum payout. Important things that you want to consider if you're considering a split strategy for Social Security: income needs over time, survivor benefit amounts, tax impact, and how does this integrate with your other income streams? If you're doing a split Social Security filing, that may or may not work to your benefit when it comes to looking at doing Roth conversions.
Sure.
So all of these, the tricky thing about financial planning is it's kind of like a spider web. All of it connects somewhere. So if you fiddle with one factor, it impacts like 7 other factors. And you got to make sure, like I said, that everything's pulling in the same direction. A couple other things to consider, required minimum distributions. Now there is a perk here, right, to being in an age gap relationship for the older spouse. If your spouse is more than 10 years younger than you, and your spouse is the sole beneficiary on an account where you need to take an RMD, so that would be like a 401k, a TSP, an IRA, then there is a more favorable IRS RMD table because they understand, okay, this person has a younger spouse. We need to make sure that there's assets there for the younger spouse, so we can't have them spend it down too quickly. So that's going to lead to lower required withdrawals and reduced taxable income. But here's the thing. Your IRA custodian, and certainly the TSP, has no idea that your spouse is 10 years younger than you. Okay? So in order to take a smaller RMD, as you are granted the right to under IRS law, you've got to know that you need to be using that favorable IRS RMD table, right? Because the regular one's going to have you taking out larger RMDs than you need to. How would you know? Well, you come see somebody like me or Dan, and we sit down with you and we say, hey, did you know that you have this benefit? Make sure that you're using this benefit. Or give it a quick Google. RMDs for people with spouses 10 years younger. And you can read about it. You can see the table online. Now, one big red flag that I will mention here. If your sole retirement account is your TSP and it's in pre-tax, you can't use the favorable RMD table, even though you are entitled to it. In order to use that favorable RMD table, you would need to roll those assets from TSP into a traditional IRA. And a lot goes into TSP rollovers. I'm not recommending a TSP rollover for every person listening to this podcast. There are pros and cons that you need to consider and make a decision about. But it is a fact that in the TSP, you have to use the standard RMD table. You cannot use the favorable one. So if you are somebody with a spouse who's 10 years younger than you, you may need to consider that TSP and, pros and cons of maybe repositioning there, because in an IRA, you absolutely can use the favorable table. One last note on withdrawal strategies. So you really, especially in an age gap relationship, really in any relationship, but especially my folks with the age gap, you've got to coordinate your withdrawals so that you can support income needs while reducing taxes for the entirety of the financial plan. The financial plan doesn't mean when the older spouse passes away. It means when the younger spouse passes away, and potentially even has impact for beneficiaries. So couple strategies you want to think about. Potentially staggering traditional and Roth withdrawals so that you can manage your taxable income so that you can stay in your preferential tax bracket. Okay. Delaying Social Security for the older spouse to boost your survivor benefits is a strategy you can consider. And then using Roth conversions in low income years to generate future tax-free income. So being mindful of those conversions. And like I said, if you've got a spouse who's still working and they're making significant income, your Roth conversion window may look like 15 years, 20 years, where you just do a little bit at a time and you get there, rather than doing large conversions for, say, maybe 4 or 5 years.
Great point.
Yeah. So no single strategy fits all couples. I will double down on that statement for age gap couples because it's even more nuanced. You've got different timelines. There's different stuff going on. You want to make sure that you're being proactive, that you are customizing and tailoring your planning to help address those disparities in age, in income, and benefit timing. Okay. So if you are in an age gap relationship, I would definitely recommend speaking to somebody who is qualified in federal employee benefits and also in financial planning at large, to make sure that you're taking all of the benefits that you have available to you and make sure that, you're managing those disparities.
Great insights there, Katelyn. And, just a super important thing. And people miss this. And Katelyn, I know you've encountered this where we'll meet somebody and they're laying out their retirement plans and they're going to do it this year. And then they say, okay, well, my spouse is going to work until this point, or they're going to work until here. And they haven't looked at what their benefits will be. So it's like, I'm going to retire and then we're going to hope. So just great stuff there, Katelyn, to make sure that you measure twice and cut once, especially in these types of situations.
For sure. So Dan, talk to us about our COLA estimates for 2026.
Okay. Now, to be clear, and believe it or not, people still get hung up on this. Okay. So to get to our nomenclature, COLA refers to cost of living adjustment for pensions in the way we talk about it. What hopefully you're going to get for 2026 is a fat pay raise, for our people who are working. But we never forget our beloved retirees. So cost of living adjustment, why does it matter? You're going to hopefully be retired for a very long time. And you're not going to be able to walk into your boss and ask for a raise. Okay. You're not going to be able to leave your one retirement plan and go get with another retirement plan to get with a bigger payout. So your ability to influence your bottom line changes. So how COLAs perform, pretty important. So they aim to keep pace with inflation. And we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between CSRS and FERS, but aim to keep pace with inflation does not mean they can outrun inflation. Okay. That's an important thing, and I'll come back to it. Okay. So generally, our beloved CSRS retirees, all of these things are based on the consumer price index. And so basically that's determined by looking at last year's for one period, comparing to this year's one period, what's the difference? And they come up with a number. So whatever the CPI might be, so if it's 3%, a CSRS retiree is going to get the full cost of living adjustment. FERS, more nuanced. So there's a 3-step formula for it. If the CPI is between 0 and 2%, a FERS retiree will get the full CPI. So it's 1.9, they get 1.9, 1.8, they get 1.8. If it is between 2 and 3%, they would get 2. So 2.2 gets 5, 2.7 gets 5. Above 3%, a FERS retiree will get CPI minus 1. So if it's 4, they get 3. If it's 5, they get 4. It can stay in the ballpark. Now, an important thing to understand about this is that doesn't mean every single component of your life, if the CPI is 2.6, That doesn't mean every single component of your life is going to go up by 2.6. Some of it's going to go up higher. For example, healthcare. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as we talk about these things. So the preliminary estimate, Katelyn, for 2026, drum roll please, is 2.6%. Modest compared to some of the previous COLAs when we had inflation running really, really hot. In this particular case, it's based on the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, the CPIW, and it compares July to September 2025 to the same period of 2024. The final rate will depend on inflation data that is still being crunched out. So this is a preliminary, could be different, and please treat it as an estimate for a planning guide and not a fixed figure. Okay. So we already know that CSRS is going to get the whole thing. FERS is going to get some, but not all, if it's above 2%, basically. So some things for you to consider planning ahead. Again, it's designed to stay in the ballpark to go along with inflation. This is a place where how you handle your TSP and your outside assets will be critical, because those are the one place that you can outrun inflation. So build some flexibility into that retirement income plan. Okay. But consider, and this is pre-retirement too, are the annuity payments going to cover your basic needs? Okay. If you do need to go into TSP, what's the timing as far as when you take it? You know, you need to have a strategy for how money comes out of TSP, not just, I have the TSP and I can go to it. As Katelyn covered in her section, don't forget spousal benefits. Okay. Social Security benefits, survivor benefits, other spouse's pension. Okay. And at the end of the day, being mindful about this, and once again, you may not need a planner, but you need a plan. Having small strategy adjustments can help preserve that long-term financial stability for you over time. So COLA estimates are helpful, but they're not guaranteed. The final amounts can change with inflation and economic shifts. It's important to have annual check-ins on this. Okay. You can't just retire and now I'm retired and this is my pension and I'm not going to look at it again. You need to look at it every year, just like you did while you were working. Just like we remind everybody, hey, it's a new year. You can put more in TSP. Okay. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that your income keeps up with your living costs. So those regular reviews contribute not only to peace of mind, but also to actual stability. And as always, if you want to talk to a friendly face or have a friendly ear listen, we are here to help you understand these things. Because, as I say on the other podcast, it's your FedLife. Make it a great one. You deserve it.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think, and Dan has a great piece on the STWS blog. It's a little older. I think we published that, I want to say in January of this year, but it may have been longer. He's got a great piece about, that component that he was talking about, where just because the COLA is 2.6 doesn't necessarily mean that all expenses across the board have increased at the rate of 2.6%. Healthcare, we very frequently inflated our plans at a much more aggressive rate because those costs rise so quickly. The cost of long-term care also, it could inflate much faster. So I think, making sure that you have a plan to close that gap, because by design, for FERS folks, in high interest rate environments, you're not getting the CPI increase even.
Absolutely.
So the average, right? You're not even getting the average. It's designed for you to get 1% less than the average. So those expenses that are above average, the gap gets wider and wider as time goes on. So making sure that you have an investment management strategy to manage that piece, I think, is really important, because a lot of feds, they go into retirement with like, okay, this is my pension. I'm going to live on my pension. But the pension by design is not structured in such a way to, keep increasing with the rate of inflation. There is an inherent gap that you must fill through, other sources, whether that is, investment proceeds or, Social Security or a part-time job, whatever you're filling that with. You've got to know first that gap exists. Secondly, that you've got to have a plan to fill it. So
couldn't agree with you more. And folks, I'm an optimistic guy. Okay. So I believe hope is important. Hope for the best is never a strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Well, that's all the time we have for today, folks. But have no fear. We'll be back next week to bring the latest updates you need to make informed decisions about your career and financial well-being as a Fed.
Now, analytics does show us that 78% of folks watching our videos are not subscribed. So if you are watching on YouTube, please do me a big favor and subscribe to this podcast. If you're listening on Spotify, you can also subscribe there. Make sure that you're subscribed so that you never miss an episode. And please do remember to share it with your friends and colleagues. It's free, and it is a great way to boost the signal and help us reach more Feds.
Indeed. And for more information on these topics and way more, check out our blog at blog.stwserve.com. Subscribe to our newsletter, The Weekly Serving, and then we'll ship the latest stuff to you. So you don't even have to go looking for it. Hit your inbox every single week.
And for those who want to dive even deeper into learning about your federal benefits and financial planning for Feds, we can encourage you to join one of our complimentary webinars. Now, we've got webinars running all the time. You can find the full list on STWServe.com, but two that I want to mention that are upcoming. We've got a survivor benefits webinar coming up on August 7th from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m., hosted by the lovely Jen Meyer. And we also have a tax planning webinar coming up on August 14th, also from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. And that one's going to be hosted by Dan the Man himself. I highly recommend, I know it's not tax season, but the best time to learn about tax season is during the current tax year so that you can actually make changes that impact your bottom line next April.
Absolutely.
Because remember, next April, you're dealing with what happened from January to December of this year. So if you don't start plugging into the tax planning stuff until February, you can't make a lot of moves that impact this year. So start that early, come learn. We'll teach you everything that we can as far as tax planning for Feds and the nuances that factor into that. Of course, if you prefer a one-on-one approach, if you need a dedicated financial advisor who knows federal benefits, who is fluent in federal benefits, feel free to reach out to our team directly for a financial planning consultation at meetings@stwserve.com.
100%. And also someone with those credentials who's not going to turn it into a Trojan horse annuity sales pitch.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Will never happen here, ever. So folks, thank you so much for listening to Fed15. Signing off, I'm Dan Sight.
And I'm Katelyn Murray.
And we will see you next week.